For Compound Everything, we talk money, markets, and investing, and today we are looking into the energy drink sector, mainly Monster and Celsius.
I think this was a lot of fun. I focused a little bit more on the history because I found it really interesting. So, do you want to go through a little bit of the history? Do you want me to go through a little bit of history?
Yeah, I think you can do it, but before we get going, I just want to say a couple things. If you can like and subscribe this video, it really helps. We do a very quick back of the napkin valuation at the end, so if you're interested in only that part,
You can fast
you
forward.
can fast forward and go to the end. But in a podcast that we listened to with Todd Coombs, he said that when him and Warren Buffett talk about companies, which is like once a week, they get together, 90% of that conversation is over the qualitative aspects of a company, known as their moats.
Yeah.
And very little time is spent on the quantitative. And part of that is because the quantitative part is kind of easy.
Yeah.
It's the qualitative aspects that make investing difficult. So we're going to really focus on the qualitative aspects today.
Yeah. If you take their investing philosophy, as it were, Berkshire's. Well, I mean, Warren Buffett, Ted Wexler, Todd Coombs, and whatnot. They're looking for businesses that are going to be around in, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You need to know more about their moats than anything else, really. And you can, any valuation you run doesn't do anything if their moat quickly erodes.
Yeah, so you really need to understand their competitive advantage.
Yeah, bottom line.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the energy drink sector as a whole.
Right. Well, you were going to do the history.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about the history. So the energy drink sector actually started, if you really want to take a purist standpoint from it, in the 1960s in Japan. Actually, there was a pharmaceutical company that in the 1960s developed some sort of a small volume formulation. I think it was like a caffeine drink or something along those lines. Maybe it wasn't caffeine, I can't remember exactly. But they marketed it as an energy supplement, and that was back in the 60s. And then enter Red Bull. So Red Bull started in around 1987.
We were young.
Yeah, we were young. But we knew nothing about that. And so they started around 1987 and really marketed themselves as a kind of high octane.
In Europe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They started in Europe and they marketed themselves as like a high energy, high octane, extreme sports kind of drink. So that's kind of how they started. And then later on, and they enjoyed fairly significant growth from around 1987 when they first began to in the mid 90s. And at that point, a well-established company actually called Hansen Naturals at that time, which largely sold juice and juice products and whatnot, started to see that there's something with these energy drinks, and they got into it and they started a product called Monster Beverage, which has really catapulted their success.
They were kind of struggling. And,
they were, yeah.
Like they were a big company, but they were kind of struggling. They needed to find a new edge.
Yeah.
And so they decided that they were going to find that edge in the energy drink sector.
And that was a very wise decision.
And they marketed themselves very well. They were very edgy. They did well. What's interesting is you said it started as a pharmaceutical kind of background, but so did Coke and Pepsi.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That is true, actually.
So as a tonic or something like that.
Yeah, so really, Red Bull really started this whole energy drink sector. Started a whole new sector. Now, unfortunately, Red Bull is not publicly traded. So a couple of the other companies that we're going to talk about today, Monster and Celsius, are publicly traded. And so going back to what I was saying before, Monster Beverage, which started out as Hansen Naturals, actually dropped the whole Hansen Naturals brand in about 2012 after about 20 years of success marketing just energy drinks. They completely got out of juices and all that kind of stuff.
And that makes a lot of sense because you don't see people, like when we were younger, people did buy juice, right? Like bottled juice.
Yeah.
And people don't do that anymore.
Not as much.
Juice around.
Not as much. The energy drink sector really started as this kind of high performance, extreme sports, kind of music industry. Yeah. So if you look at the things that Red Bull sponsored early on, there were things like F1, so Formula One racing.
Well, they still actually
they still own a team there. They started sponsoring like cliff diving, so it'd be cliff diving competitions, mountain biking, and stuff like that, snowboarding and whatnot. And Red Bull actually has a whole Red Bull channel that's dedicated to extreme sports. And my sons and I, when we were on a trip, we found this station that did extreme snowboarding, and we quite enjoyed it, actually.
And it was Red Bull?
It was Red Bull.
Yeah. So they own a few companies. Like they own like their Red Bull Media. They own the F1 teams. I think they own like a communications company, but
Yeah.
we'll keep referencing Red Bull because they are the number one energy drink still
Yes.
to this day. They hold that position, but we'll reference it, but it doesn't, we're not going to value it or anything because it's private, but we'll reference it because that is the competition for Monster and Celsius.
So what's really fascinating, in my opinion, is the evolution of that sector. So it started as like this high octane extreme sports that really would appeal to young men, if you really want to be a purist about it, between like the ages of 18, 35, mostly male, again, high energy, that kind of thing. And it's somewhat pivoted. I mean, there's still that demographic there now, but there's new entrant Celsius, who's now taking a bit of a different approach. And they're appealing a little bit more to a fitness and female crowd, in my opinion. And so you're getting a new kind of expansion of the energy drink sector.
Well, they're expanding the total addressable market.
Exactly.
Is what Celsius is doing. And Red Bull's Red Bull is still predominantly a male customer. But what's interesting is like just in general in the past, I want to say like 3 to 5 years, you've seen more and more. I see a lot of females carrying Red Bull now.
Yes.
Right? That would have never happened like 5 years ago. Females just didn't carry that around. What I don't see a lot of females yet carrying Monster around.
Yeah.
And I just think that's because of their can.
Yes.
And that's fine because Monster, they know their demographic and that is who they're marketing to and whatnot. That being said, Monster has a lot of different brands under their umbrella, so you do see females carrying Rainstorm around,
which is a Monster brand.
Very similar tin to Celsius. Now, Celsius is interesting because although Red Bull created the energy drink market, and then Monster came in and really they're really nipping at the heels for that number one spot. They're doing and they did an excellent job marketing and whatnot. Still do an excellent job marketing. They know what they're doing. They have a huge fan base. But Celsius came in and they went into a market that existed. But I would say Celsius is actually the company that is responsible for expanding it into making that total addressable market larger.
Yeah, they've basically widened the door.
Because up until Celsius and is it Alani, like a few other companies, you didn't see people like women carrying energy drinks or talking about, right? They drank coffee.
Yes.
Right, but now
they carry around Starbucks.
Right, but they've changed that and they've changed the whole mindset, or even like white collar, right? Because I think even Monster said that they're predominantly sold to blue collar workers.
Yes.
Not to like do a difference, but that is just what they say. Like it's a different type of market. All of a sudden now you're expanding into more white collar jobs, right? You wouldn't necessarily see a doctor, right?
Yeah.
In the office drinking a Monster.
Yes.
But
even though we need the energy.
Even though you need the energy. But you would totally see a doctor drinking a Celsius or a coffee.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a look for it. And I really think that Celsius did a great job of expanding that total addressable market. And of course, Red Bull is going to jump in on that. Monster is going to jump in on that. So there is going to be a lot of competition there. So although Red Bull created the market, and then Monster really, I would say they really helped grow the market, particularly in North America.
Yes.
Celsius grew it even further by bringing in people who wouldn't have otherwise even thought of energy drinks.
Yeah. A lot of these cans that you're going to see on the shelf space, you may think, well, Monster doesn't own a lot of the shelf space, but they actually do because they own several different brands
even
in
just
that shelf space.
With Monster, though, they do own a lot
They
of
own a lot of shelf space.
Red Bull and Monster, if you walk into any convenience store or any Walmart or Target, Monster and Red Bull are predominantly the shelf space.
Yeah. And then you've also got Monster, which is trying to expand into alcoholic beverages and whatnot.
Not going so well.
Not going so well, as far as I understand. But they're trying. So they're kind of like screwing around and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also expanding internationally.
Yeah. So then you get Celsius come along and say, we're going to market ourselves to a different demographic, maybe more professional demographic and people who are interested more in fitness and whatnot. Now, one of the big claims of Celsius when it first came out, and I recall a colleague of mine saying this, that's how I first got introduced to the brand, was that, there's this drink coming online that helps you burn calories at rest. And so
which is like such a crock in my opinion, but
well, I mean, they do have some studies to prove it. I did go through
weak studies.
They're weak studies, but I did go through and actually examine some of the research they tout, and at least based on their description of the research, there may be something to it. How it increases your resting metabolic rate and whatnot.
But it's not going to make an obese person not obese.
It's not Ozempic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not Ozempic in a can.
Exactly.
Having said that, if you go back to what we said before, this is now more marketed to the fitness conscious person based on the fact that, one, it helps you burn calories at rest, or at least that's what are the reported effects of it. They're trying to identify with a group that doesn't identify with that extreme sports kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, because I would never carry a Monster can around. I just wouldn't, because like that, I don't like and it sounds so ridiculous, but it matters. Yeah. Right? But I would totally carry around Celsius can, Rainstorm, right? And like I said before, like I don't know if I would have ever seen like a doctor carry around a Monster, but I see Celsius's, Starbucks coffee cups everywhere. There's just like an identifying thing with carrying around a particular brand in your hand.
And it's how they marketed themselves, right? Yeah. An executive walking into a meeting with a Monster might be very different than walking with a Celsius or something like that. I mean, it sounds silly when you really think about it on its face.
It is silly, but humanity is silly.
Yeah. And so I think from that standpoint, Celsius, the other third thing I was going to say is that they are sugar-free, which deviates somewhat from, Monster and Red Bull.
Originally, but not anymore.
No, they do have sugar-free options as well. But again, it's that health-conscious consumer that you're trying to target more so with Celsius.
So on the sugar-free aspect, actually, in the energy drink sector as a whole, the sugar drinks have actually stagnated in growth. There is zero growth in the brand's sugar drinks. But the growth is all coming from the non-sugar sector. So I think, is it Ultra Light that Monster's non-sugar, or Ultra or something? There's that. And then Red Bull has non-sugar options. And then obviously all of Celsius is non-sugar. Yes. But that is the segment that's really taking off, as society as a whole doesn't want to be consuming, 35 grams of sugar in 30 seconds in a can.
That's right. So they're recognizing the health problems with consuming that much sugar.
All the energy drinks.
Yeah, all the energy drinks.
Now, I would say that Celsius, again, has probably really put that trajectory forward. Yeah. But, when you're a big player like Monster, you're not going to let this little puny company come in and eat your lunch. You're just going to pivot along with them.
Yeah, that's right. Now, along that same vein, there has been some challenges in the energy drink sector, and there was a big to-do, I guess, a few years ago, which I think is still going on to a point, but maybe died down some. And that is the whole amount of caffeine in each can of Celsius and Monster and Red Bull and whatnot. And there was some concerns on the part of the FDA and parent groups and whatnot, to the point where one of our sons, when he was going to school, the administration decided that these children, adolescents, were not allowed to carry
this would have
energy
been around
drink can.
2017 in high school. He was in high school. And if they came in with a Monster, at that time it would have been Monster that they would have been buying, a teacher saw them, anyone, that had to go straight in the trash.
They confiscated it.
They took it. It didn't matter if it was open, closed, they took it. You couldn't even keep it in your bag. Yes. You had to throw it out. But all the girls were walking in with Vente's from Starbucks, which actually has much more caffeine than a Monster had in it.
So it's a whole stigma issue with it. And so the FDA, I guess, was talking about potentially regulating the amount of caffeine in these cans and whatnot. And so, there is some potential there for regulation. Now, if you're looking at branding and whatnot, that could be a concern maybe more for, the Monster brand itself than something like Celsius. So really, no one's going to care. The FDA doesn't probably really care if a 35-year-old woman who's going to the gym consumes a can of Celsius with 200 milligrams of caffeine in it. Now, these are American numbers, by the way. Canadian numbers are often lower because Health Canada has some issues with that much caffeine content.
Yeah, so our Celsiuses have 160 or 140.
I think it's 140 in Canada, but either way. So the point being is that if with an older demographic, the regulation would probably be less intense, because I hope someone would clue in that consuming a large coffee or an extra large coffee is going to contain just as much, if not more, caffeine than an energy drink.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and who's drinking the Celsius? Generally, people who are going to the gym, more fit, this and that, people don't care. But all of a sudden, your 13 or 14 or 15-year-old kid is drinking a Monster.
Yeah.
Right? Generally, a younger, particularly male, is not going to buy Celsius. Our kids actually don't like Celsius.
No.
At all. They don't like the taste. So I drink, although they do drink my Celsius, because they don't want to spend the money on their Monsters.
All the time. But that fits with one thing I found, and that is that the younger generation tends to be more drawn to the loud packaging.
Yeah, that fruit punch Monster, like, man, that is a tacky can.
Yeah.
But the younger generation loves it.
Yeah, they tend to love the louder cans and the more intense flavors. Yeah. Whereas the older generation tends to like a little bit more subdued can and a little bit more subdued flavor, which actually kind of checks out.
Yeah. Now, going back to the caffeine and the FDA and this and that, 2 side points. Before COVID, that was a real hot thing. They were actually working to put regulation on energy drinks.
Yeah.
But then COVID happened. And then that just kind of disappeared.
Okay.
I didn't know that until I looked into this. I don't know if it will come back up. It might not. But that window of opportunity has allowed these energy drinks to push harder. And once you get so entrenched into society, it gets harder and harder for them to start regulating without giving more leniency to the companies that they would have otherwise given.
Yes.
So COVID was, for them, a real bright spot because COVID was taking all the attention.
Yeah.
Right? So that's number one. So number two, I have some statistics in the States. Poison centers do get called for caffeine overdose.
I've heard that.
Yeah, in 2022, you had 2,323 calls to the poison centers. And in 2023, 1 year later, you had 2,834. So you went up by like 500 calls. Now, our son, at one point, we brought Ghost back. So we always bring different energy drink backs for our kids.
Just things you can't get in Canada.
Can't get in Canada. So we brought them Ghost back. This was before you could get it here. I think you can get Ghost here now, but this was a little while back. And he was up late. I don't know if he was like crunching an essay or what, but he drank one Ghost, and then a few minutes later he chugged back another Ghost, which means he drank 400 milligrams in like 5 minutes of caffeine. He said
that's substantial.
He started shaking. He was lying in bed. His heart was beating, and he just felt like anxious all over. And part of that is because our energy drinks don't have as much. And the other part of it is, for some reason, he felt the need to drink too. Yeah. So, like, caffeine OD is real. People have died by it. We've heard our kids say, like, oh, I drank way too much caffeine and could just feel my heart going. Yeah. I have a fairly high tolerance to caffeine. I think I probably have an ongoing stream of caffeine. Just at any given time, if you were to do a blood test, I would definitely have caffeine in it. But that is a concern, and the more people who call into poison centers, or the more parents who report this, or, and then if you have a heart condition, it has, in fact, people have died from caffeine overdose and whatnot, that will push the FDA possibly to start regulating.
From your statistics, it would be interesting from a physician's perspective to know who exactly was that demographic who was calling. Was that young people? I would suppose, in all likelihood, that was younger people, adolescents and whatnot. That probably represented the bulk of those calls. Because over time, you do... Or parents.
Who, like, see their kid, like, your heart's racing, your kid's anxious, you're starting to... Like, we didn't know until a few days later, because he came up and he was already, like, a little bit older. He might have even been 18 already at that point. I don't know.
Now, there is a certain tolerance that will develop to caffeine consumption as well. And I mean, as time goes on, as you get older, the likelihood that you consume caffeine on a daily basis goes up significantly, to the point in people in their 60s, it's something to the tune of 98 or 99% of people will consume caffeine on a reasonably regular basis.
And that's why I love the energy drink sector. Because it's like, so this is how it starts. This is this is totally anecdotal, but I've seen this in our kids. I've seen this in our friends. Yeah. I've seen this in you and me. So it started out with 1 cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? And then it turned into 2 cups of coffee in the morning. And then it turned in, by the time I was like 25, 26, it turned in 2 cups of coffee in the morning and coffee in the afternoon. Right? And now it's like 3 cups of coffee in the morning, a Celsius in the afternoon, a Diet Coke in the afternoon, and on it goes.
So from that standpoint, I think the regulation perspective is probably somewhat overblown, in my opinion. So I'm not sure what it would take, but I can't see why it would be such a difficult thing for these companies just to diminish the amount of caffeine in the drink. If there was they don't like 200, dropping it down to
Well, that's what they
140
do
would
here.
be not unreasonable. So
That's what they do here.
You
They
dropped
have
it down
to
by
drop
20%. So from that standpoint, I think the FDA and the whole regulation thing is way overblown.
So I did a little look into convenience stores because I think it's 60% of energy drinks are sold out of convenience stores. I think that's going to change as Costco sells the big mass. And actually, there was a CEO from one convenience store, one of the largest convenience stores in the States. In the article, it didn't say what store that was. I don't know if it was 7-Eleven. I don't know what it was. Just said one of the largest. And they said that people are, because the economy is tight right now, buying in more mass, which obviously alludes to Costco. And they're also going to dollar store. And we've seen a real increase of energy drinks in dollar stores.
Yes.
And that's where our kids get their energy drinks from generally, is from Dollarama. And so this person was saying that they're seeing less foot traffic in convenience stores. So the question is that going to affect the margins of they have huge margins, these companies.
Massive margins,
because it used to be like you have for here Canadian dollars, it's like 2 for $5 for Monster, but now you're seeing them for like $2 in Dollarama.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is a concern when the CEO comes out and says we're seeing less traffic in the energy drink sector. Now, I dug a little deeper. I read some trade journals in the convenience store, and a lot of these CEOs and analysts, there's an analyst in particular from Goldman Sachs, thinks that this is just a trend right now because of the economy, and it will pick back up.
I mean, that makes sense. In reading Monster's most recent press conference, or their most recent quarterly results, they were talking about increasing their price by about 5% starting November 1st.
And they said Celsius is going to keep, obviously Monster didn't mention that, but an analyst said Celsius will probably be able to keep up with Monster.
Right. So they are still increasing their prices. They still have that pricing power by the sounds of it. So we'll see what happens if they increase their price, if demand goes down, remains flat, increases, who knows. I think it's likely to increase.
Me too.
I mean, I think this energy drink sector is somewhat in its infancy. I can see them doing well.
I compare the energy drink sector to video games. And then people would be like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But here's why. 10 years ago, no one would be sitting doing a podcast saying, oh, my kids buy energy drinks. It would have been like, I would never let my kid buy an energy drink. Energy drinks are evil. Like, do you know how many caffeine? And at one point, there was this rumor going around, like, there's bull semen in it and like all this stuff, right? Like, but that's how video games were when we were young. Right? If your kids play video games, they're going to grow up to be a serial killer. Yeah. They're going to fail in school and be a dropout.
Yeah.
And then it's like, everyone played video games. Everybody had a system. Everyone grew up. We all got jobs. And here's the thing. Are there people who are like still playing too much video games at a particular age and not getting a job? Yeah, but those people always existed. It just wasn't video games that pulled them over.
They're a minority. Right?
Yeah. And that's how I feel like energy drinks. So now it's like normalized.
Yes.
Right? So who, like for video games, like who doesn't have some sort of console in their house?
Yes.
And also if you say to someone like, oh, I'm getting my kid like a PS5 for their birthday, no moms are like, oh my goodness. But when we were kids, that was how it was.
It was.
Right? That is how it was. And so energy drinks have evolved enough that no one cares anymore. And that's what you need because the market gets bigger. So now you have the older people drinking it. Now all of a sudden their parents, their kids are drinking it. Now our parents are like, oh, your parents now drink Joy Burst.
That's right.
Right? They're 70.
Yep.
And that has 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. It's a Canadian company. And so it's like the demographic has gotten larger and larger. Yep. No one questions it really anymore if someone drinks an energy drink. So in convenience stores, I just want to go back to that. The juice, tea, and total beer segment, they're going to decrease. They're decreasing that segment in most convenience stores, and the energy drink sector is in fact growing. So on average, according to an analyst at Goldman Sachs who is writing in these convenience stores trade journals, he said that Celsius will probably in the next year gain about 11% shelf space, and Red Bull's probably going to lose about 3%.
Wow.
And then on a larger scale, you're going to see like the teas and the beer and the juices continue to shrink while energy continues to grow.
Interesting.
So it's just a trend change.
So let's talk a little bit about projected growth. Now, from my research, the projected growth rates, I went to several sources. It was all over the place. It was like absolutely all over the place.
I had a hard time with that too.
So a few sources I found, or two sources I found, and they were kind of all over the place with their projections. So one cited that the current market cap was estimated to be about $74 billion for the energy drink sector globally, right? And so they had projected that would probably expand over the next 5 years about 5.6%. But another source I found said it was larger than that, and it was going to expand by about 8.6% into 2032. And by 2032, it would be representing about $205 billion. So the estimates are kind of all over the place, which I found somewhat fascinating. But at the same time, it just, I think with uncertainty represents opportunity in the market. So yeah. I think you got to do your homework.
So the question is, like, we all know that the energy drink sector is going to grow.
Yeah.
But the question is, as an investor, what is the better investment? Is it going to be Monster or Celsius? Which one is going to take more of that share as it grows? And which company is where their stock price is today, is going to go up? Knowing everything we know, that's the question that we want to ask.
So I think there's room for like, I think that the total addressable market, as we've alluded to, is going to expand. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And if you want to backtrack just for a second, Red Bull in, I think, 2023 sold 12 billion cans of Red Bull. That's on their own website. Whereas Coca-Cola sells about 2 billion cans a day.
That is just
so day.
Crazy.
So if you
I'm guessing that's under all
that's
their
global.
brands.
Global, all their brands,
yeah.
you know.
But that's still wild.
Yeah. So it's not just Coca-Cola, but it's, 7-Up, etc.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I think there's significant room for growth in this market. There's very little question, because Coke is, drinking Coke has been normalized, basically.
And we are a culture. This is one thing. I haven't seen a lot of analysts talk on this. The Gen Zs in particular are a consuming culture of beverage. They love to consume beverages. That is like their thing. And we notice that in our kids, like the amount of money that they spend on beverages is just wild. But it's like just part of who they are, right? Like they either go out for a Frappuccino, or they go get an energy drink, or they're carrying around a Diet Coke. Beverage consumption is a thing for them, and I think they just find joy in consuming calories through beverage.
Yeah. So that begs the better question: which is the better investment at this point, Monster or Celsius?
Like we know energy drinks are going to last. The question is, which energy drink is going to last, right? Kind of like,
and which is the better investment?
Right. It's like electric cars. Like we know electric cars are kind of taking off. We're kind of getting down there, but which one? Or cars back in the day, which car company? There was hundreds.
Yes.
It was hard to decide.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now we're getting established. We have some big players in the game.
Yeah.
Right? I think Celsius is number 3, which is they've come out of pretty much nowhere.
Oh, that came out of nowhere.
Came out of nowhere. And so, the question is like, how do we make money off of this?
So let's talk a little bit about the difference. I mean, we've talked a bit about both of them. So from Monster's perspective, it's a very well-established company, well-entrenched. It's basically the, Coca-Cola or the Pepsi, as it were, of the energy drink industry. They're not going anywhere in all likelihood. Yeah. Then you've got this new incumbent, Celsius, which really had meteoric growth over the past probably 5 years, maybe 7 years, give or take.
In the past 3 years.
3 years, it's just been exponential. Yeah. They didn't come to Canada until 2024 or 2023, 2024. Either way, they're relatively new in Canada, and you're seeing that Costco now and whatnot.
Now, part of that is their partnership with Pepsi, or that Pepsi bought a 10% stake in them. So
Pepsi's
really been able to get them the shelf space.
And that's mirroring the deal that Coca-Cola made with Monster in the past. Mm-hmm. And so they signed a deal with Monster to not compete with them. And so that probably is going to be something similar with Pepsi and Celsius, you would think. Yeah.
So Monster and Coke actually did a swap.
Oh, yeah. You told me about that.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
And so Coke took 16% of the ownership in Monster. And then they did like this swap in around 2015 where Monster took all of Coke's energy drinks, and then Coke took all of, because they were that other company.
Hanson Naturals.
Yeah, Hanson Naturals. And then Coke took all of Monster's non-energy. So they had like Peace Tea was one of them.
Oh,
and then
fascinating.
Coke ended up with Peace Tea. And so they did this swap.
Interesting.
Right? So that
product swap.
So that Monster would stay energy and Coke would just stay beverage, non-energy.
Smart.
And then I think the highest ownership that Coke had in Monster at some point was 20% because of share buybacks and whatnot. But now we have Celsius and Pepsi, which in part that's kind of caused Celsius's stock to drop because Pepsi came out and said they had too much inventory not moving.
That's right. And so that's what's caused the near-term weakness in Celsius' stock price, which may present a buying opportunity if you believe that Celsius is going to be around. Now, you brought up an interesting comparison the other day when we were talking about this. And you said, well, Monster's an established brand, and we were arguing, I shouldn't say arguing. Now, we were debating.
Discussing.
Yeah, sorry. we were discussing the merits of both companies. And one of the things you had mentioned about Celsius is, what if they turn out to be a Snapple, right? So we all remember Snapple as a kid.
Well, if you're in your 40s, you remember Snapple.
Right. If you're in your 40s, you remember Snapple. Even in your 30s, you probably remember Snapple. They had a huge run on the iced tea market.
They had a grip, like everyone loves Snapple.
Everyone loves Snapple. And then I guess a series of acquisitions happened and mismanagement happened, and now Snapple is
who drinks Snapple?
Consigned to the dustbin of business.
Right.
So from that standpoint, what is preventing Celsius from being a Snapple?
Right, and that was one of my questions I proposed to you, because I was like, okay, Snapple came in and like it was super popular. Like everyone loved Snapple. We all bought Snapples. We paid premium for Snapple.
Yeah.
I loved it. I had one every day. I mean, that was way too much sugar, but that like in high school, that's what I did. And then all of a sudden it fell out of favor.
Poof, gone.
It just fell out of favor. But what's still around? Coke and Pepsi. So my question for Celsius, because I am a lover of Celsius.
Yep.
My question for Celsius is like, in 10 years from now, because Snapple had a fairly decent run.
They did.
Right? Will Monster and Red Bull still around? And Celsius is just kind of like, poof, gone. Because it just falls out of favor. Maybe Alani, is that how you pronounce it?
I think so.
Yeah. They come up and people like them better. Maybe Monster does just such a superb job of marketing Rainstorm to the same demographic that Celsius is trying to market to. And then Celsius just goes away. So I am a little concerned about the Snapple theory for Celsius. That does weigh in the back of my mind.
Yeah. So in the end, will Celsius get Snappled?
Will Celsius get Snappled? Yeah, that's a good question.
So from that standpoint, maybe that's in part why there's a discount at current, if you want to call it that. On the one hand, you have an incumbent, you have a well-established player in Monster,
Moved
and then
up to number 3.
And then you have this new one, Celsius, which is basically number 3 in this fledgling energy drink. Well, I wouldn't say fledgling anymore, but this energy drink market, which is probably still got some growth left in it. I don't think it's done growing yet. And you've got this company that came out of nowhere, high growth and whatnot, that is now on a discount. So those are our two options really in this energy drink sector, in terms of if you want to purchase a company that's going to be in that energy drink sector, those are your options.
Another thing that people don't talk about with Celsius is that how much are they going to eat of Starbucks, like that industry, right? No one ever talks about the coffee industry and the energy drink industry actually being like the same industry. Now, I don't think they were when it was Monster, because the people who were drinking Monster weren't walking around carrying a Starbucks, right? Like our boys weren't walking around with a chai tea latte.
No.
Right? They're walking around with a Monster. All of a sudden now that the total addressable market has become more common for the health sector, but also women.
Yes.
Right? All these influencers now who only used to have Starbucks in the video, now they have their Celsiuses or their Alanis or their Rainstorms. They have a little sleek can and they have all of that. So another question to ask about energy drinks is, will they eat into Starbucks? Will they be competition for Starbucks? Because I actually think when people say Celsius and Monster are the competition, I also think Celsius and Starbucks are a little bit of competition, because I used to go to Starbucks in the afternoon. Now I just grab a Celsius out of the fridge.
Which is easier.
It's
and
easier,
actually cheaper.
It's tastier in the summer. I prefer it. And the calories are way less.
Yeah. Well, you've got effectively almost 0 calories in a Celsius.
And because we buy them from Costco, it's not $6, $7, $8, $9.
No, it's about $2 and change
exactly.
for a can.
Exactly.
So from that standpoint, it's more portable. It's cheaper. So I totally agree with your perspective that may be another area of the market they may be able to steal, is from somewhere like Starbucks.
Yeah, it's not just energy drinks.
It's the coffee market.
It's also the Becky market. I follow a lot of fashion influencers. I love them, but also they give me a really good insight into companies. And I've noticed a huge shift from Starbucks cups in their videos, Stanley in their videos, to now energy drinks. That being said, never a Monster. Sometimes a Red Bull. Sometimes a Red Bull, because they have like cute cans, like the Forest Green one's like super cute.
Yeah.
But never a Monster.
Well, that goes back to their marketing, and that these are the people that these companies are trying to reach, respectively, with each brand.
Right.
And they're doing a good job.
They're doing an excellent job. So I definitely think Monster and Celsius can coexist, for sure, and Red Bull. But I do have to think, like, can Celsius grow more even, because now they're going to steal that coffee sector?
I buy that narrative.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I don't think personally Celsius is at any risk of being snappled in the next little bit.
Hopefully.
Hopefully not.
My main concern for Celsius is Rainstorm.
I can see that.
And Alani.
Alani seems to be getting into that market as well. And then there's a few others that if you follow our energy drinks on Reddit and stuff like that, you'll see there's other ones. Ghost.
Ghost is growing, but it's still like, they make like, it's very small market share.
And C4 is another one.
Yeah, C4. Yeah.
So more appealing to the, maybe the gym crew and whatnot. So if you're, a gym rat, you'll probably be more familiar with Ghost and whatnot.
I will say in the energy drink sector, like die-hard energy drink drinkers, it is very popular to hate on Celsius.
It is,
The people who love Celsius are not hardcore energy drinkers.
Yes.
The people who love Celsius tend to be new energy drinkers.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's move on to valuation.
Yeah, after all that, that like I have way more notes and so do you, but we're just droning on here.
Yeah, so let's cut to the chase.
Okay.
What's it worth? So what do you have for a valuation for Celsius? Do you want to start there or do you want to start with Monster?
Yeah, I'll start with Celsius. So for Celsius, it has had exponential growth that it cannot keep up.
It's had triple digit growth
it's
over
like
the past
you
few
just
years.
can't keep that up, and part of it is because people just started hearing about it, and then Pepsi decided to take that 10% stake, and it's just like exploded.
Yeah.
And so we can't really go by the last 3, 4, 5 years because that's just they can't maintain that growth.
No.
So I think now the overall energy drink market in general is said to grow. What did you say?
Somewhere between 5.6 and 8.5% over the next 7 years ish.
So I figured that Celsius is going to grow faster than the energy drink market
I would
in
believe
general. That. And so I gave them a 15% growth rate. Now I only did over 5 years. Now I used to do over 10 years for a lot of companies, but I find society moves faster now. Companies come and go a lot quicker than they used to. And recently we heard John Templeton say he never forecasts further than, he's passed away, but it was in an older interview. He never forecasts further than 5 years.
Yeah.
And I've liked that because I've always kind of felt uneasy about the 10-year. A lot of guys talk about 10-year, and that's always made me feel uneasy because of the fast pace of the business cycle now. Yeah. So I went 5 years out.
Yep.
Okay, so I gave a growth rate of 15%. Because I actually think it might grow faster, but I think that's a fair growth rate for this company that's just like stealing market share and creating market share, and they're doing an excellent job in pushing their product out. Over 5 years, I gave it a 30 PE because I figure if it's growing at 15%, it's going to have a higher PE.
Yep.
And I gave it a discount rate of 15%, which in my mind is what we like to do, and it deserves that discount rate because it could be Snapple.
It could get Snappled.
It could get Snappled. Okay, so that gives me a valuation of $30.28.
Interesting.
So what did you get? I only did one valuation for Celsius. I didn't do a high-low.
Okay. So for my metrics, I gave it an EPS, starting EPS of $1.09 over the trailing 12 months. So I used the trailing 12-month EPS, which is $1.09.
Okay, and I used 101.
Okay, so that we're going to get a little bit of a different number there. So I gave it a growth rate of 15%, discount rate of 15%. Whereas its actual trailing 12-month growth rate's been about 56%.
Which is insane.
And I think the forecast growth is about 20%. So we're actually kind of punishing it there from that perspective. I get a end EPS in 5 years of $2.19. And if you give that a PE of 30, as you have, you get a future value of $65.77. Discount that back at 15%, you get $32.70 as a present value.
And it's trading at what, just over 33 right now?
Well, as of today,
it was 29 not long ago.
It was 28. It went down to 28 something. So you could have grabbed it at
which was such a good
significant
deal.
discount. You grabbed some?
I did, yeah.
I grabbed some on the way down.
And then as it was going up, I grabbed more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, if you believe it's a good company that's going to be growing in the future, getting it now seems to be a reasonably fair value.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the moral of the story.
What we're saying, but of course, like none of this is advice.
None of this is investment advice. Do your own due diligence.
Two retail investors just talking about our opinion.
That's right. That's right. Now let's talk a little bit about Monster. So Monster is a bit of a different scenario. One of the things that got Monster on my radar recently was the fact that they did a tender offer. I love tender offers.
Yeah, you do.
So tender offers to me represent the idea that management thinks that shares are somewhat undervalued. Usually, if they're good stewards with the capital. And so the current CEO of Monster has been there forever. And so I saw that. Now, one of the red flags that I found out a little later on was that the CEO and co-CEO actually decided to tender a significant number of shares in that tender offer.
Yeah, so that's kind of...
Did they arrange this tender offer in order to get some exit liquidity without, dumping shares
and drawing attention.
Right, like,
oh, the CEO of Monster dropped this many shares.
So, I mean, having said that, they tendered something to the tune of 600,000 shares, of which 300,000 were accepted each. Right. So, take that with a grain of salt. But the bottom line is, usually, in my opinion, if it's good management, those tender offers represent basically management's opinion, in my mind, that the shares are trading toward the bottom end of where they'd want to see it.
And history shows us that the CEO of Monster has done a really great job with Monster.
That's right.
So
yeah. So from that standpoint, let's jump into it. So from my numbers, what I got for Monster, their trailing 12-month EPS was $1.62. Okay. And if you give them a growth rate, I said, well, let's give them a growth rate, a little on the lower side of 8%. If you believe the energy drink market's going to only grow at about 5.6%, that might be a little bit inflated, but we'll see. And then if you give it a discount rate of 10%, I knocked the discount rate down some because it's an established player. I think there's much less risk of Monster being Snappled than Celsius. I gave them a future PE of 25, being an established player, probably not as aggressive growth. From that standpoint, if you take my numbers, if you give them a PE of 25, you get a future value of $36.95. If you give them a future PE of 30, you get a discounted value at present of $44.33.
And it's around $51.
And it's around $51 as of today.
Yeah.
So maybe not the best bargain right now, per se.
Right. But it is an established company.
But it is an established company and still a growing industry.
Whenever there's less risk, you're not going to make as much money.
That's right.
Generally. Unless unless something horrific happens with Monster and it tanks down to $10.
That's right.
So,
I mean, you could say that either Monster is, close to fairly valued or maybe a little overvalued.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah. So mine's similar.
Okay.
So I'll go through mine. So I gave it a growth rate of 9%. I actually think that the energy drink sector is going to grow more than what they project, just because
I tend to agree.
I'm seeing it grow more. People are more comfortable with it. More demographics are drinking it. It's not just that 18 to 30-year-old demographic now. You have some younger than 18, whether you agree with that or not. You have 40 to 50-year-old, and like I said, now we're even seeing your parents.
That's right.
Get into energy drink sector. So I actually think it's going to grow at a little bit more, not a lot, but a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I gave Monster a growth rate of 9%. Over 5 years. We already talked about that. I gave it a PE of 30, and when I value really great companies, I always do a PE of 30 because Lee Lu said it's really hard to find a great company under a PE of 30.
You're right.
So that's what I anchor to.
Yeah.
Okay, and I gave it a discount of 12%. Now you might think, why 12%, not 15%? I don't think Monster needs to be as punished as Celsius.
Right.
Because it's Monster.
Our philosophy
it's the Coke in the industry, or maybe the Pepsi. I guess Red Bull's the Coke, and that So that gives me a valuation of $41.42.
There you go.
Now we know to us that is we go by that. Some people who like to be even more safe will take that valuation and then punish it even more by like 50%. But doing that,
in our
you miss out on way too many experiences. But again, this is not advice. This is just our own situation.
Yeah, I mean, in our experience, when you discount something that much, it's very hard to find anything that's investable.
Especially a great company.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why do I want to miss out on a great company? If I'm that scared that I need to give it a discount rate of 12% or 15% and then punish it again by 50%, then I'm too scared to go into that company.
That's right.
Or I'm too dumb to understand the company that I shouldn't even be looking at it.
That's right. If it's an industry you're not familiar with or can't understand, then you need to punish that thing.
Yeah, like if I have to punish it that much, that means like, oh, maybe that should have gone into the too hard pile to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I think I can understand energy drinks.
Well, you consume them, you can see them. I think it's an easy industry to understand.
Our whole family, we literally live off caffeine. Our family is fueled
powered by caffeine.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that pretty much concludes our discussion. I don't think there's much else there's more to say, but I think we've said a lot of the pertinent positives. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section and we'll try to get back to you.
And you can find our podcast on all platforms and obviously our YouTube videos here on YouTube. If you can like and subscribe, that really helps our channel, so we would appreciate it. And we will see you next week.